Hey, everybody. Welcome. This is the Sherborn Advisory Committee of December 11th, 2024. Thanks, everybody, for coming out on a rainy night. One of those nights Zoom might have been easier, but it's nice to all be here. It's nice to all be here together. Let me start by reading the agenda. I did a screen share so anyone on Zoom can see. We'll get the agenda approved and then jump into things. So start with advisory reports as per usual. We have some previous meeting minutes to approve, have reserve fund transfers to consider for fire department and town buildings. We're going to talk about governance task force issues, and then that's everything in terms of things we might be voting on. And then some big picture budget overview, or there's some materials I sent around not that long ago, but that we'll talk about as a way of really just laying out some big picture budget kind of dimensions before we get into January and sort of dig into specific details. And I think the material I have may prompt some questions and discussion that I think could be useful for all of us. So that is the agenda. So I would welcome a motion to approve the agenda as read. Thanks, Stephen. Shelley, thanks. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Okay, 9-0 for that. That's great. And I'll just mention that Penn's taking minutes, and he and I agreed that tonight, and I think it'd be good going forward if we start actually recording in minutes who made motions and who seconded them. It hasn't been the advisory tradition. Advisory tradition is just motion was made and seconded and passed, but seems like a detail we can add to the minutes that might be helpful for some people who track through those. Okay, so I've got a few advisory reports to start with, and then I suspect others do as well. So the letter to the regional school committee got mailed. I think everybody saw that and got a copy. Paul and I were at the school committee meeting about a week ago. As their meetings are structured, they have public comment at the beginning, no discussion during the meeting, so they didn't really want to hear from us during the meeting. They said they were happy to get the letter. They always like hearing from the towns, and would take it under advisement, and suggested setting up a small meeting in January when I think Peter Moores and I, maybe some others, but probably a very small meeting to sit down with Mark Healy, the chair of the regional school committee, to talk through and see if we can come to a common understanding. Remains to be seen where that conversation goes and whether the January thing is just that we want to keep putting this off, or if, we'll really have a productive conversation. My hope is that we can have a productive conversation. I think what we're asking in the letter is not very much, and really just is, please do your budgeting according to the state regs that say how regional school committees should do budgeting. And we would appreciate it and like them to do that. And hopefully we can get there pretty easily and pretty quickly, but we'll see how that conversation goes. Penn and I had a good meeting in terms of liaison things. Penn and I had a good meeting with Pam Douse yesterday to talk about treasurer collector budget. I don't think we need to get into a lot of details there, but it was a good conversation. I'll just put out a reminder that liaisons, if you haven't reached out to the folks to whom you're the liaison for those who have budgets, it would be great to do that soon, so that any preliminary kinds of conversations can happen before we get to the end of the month when they're more formally submitting budgets. I also just wanted to flag one date. I need to coordinate this with Peter Moores, but we have a meeting on Wednesday, January 22nd. The night before that, Tuesday, January 21st, the regional school folks are going to come to the capital budget committee, I think, to talk about the track field $2 million project that they want to do. I think many of us, maybe all of us, will be interested in hearing that. So I just wanted to flag that.
Can you spend 10 seconds on what track?
Yeah, I will in just a second. But that Tuesday night is when the school folks are going to be coming to the capital budget committee. I had a brief conversation with Peter Moores, and I think he'd be fine if we hopped in and, we could, if there are a quorum of us, we can just post and have a meeting at this time. But just to listen, don't want to invade capital budget, but it seems like a time that we could gather a lot of information. So at the high school and middle school, the regional school committee has proposed replacing I think the primary athletic field, the track that runs around it, the fencing, and a lot of the stuff around it. They are proposing it as a $2 million project, of which Sherborn's share, if it were approved at $2 million, would be $927,000. I'm going to send a letter to Dawn, an email to Dawn Fattore, who's the business administrator, and strongly encourage and suggest that the chances of getting that project approval will be higher if they have an actual bid for the work rather than just kind of an estimate of, hey, it's about 2 million. Will you guys approve about, your 927,000? So I think it'd be really good if they could get an actual bid for, we can actually see real numbers for what they.
Why they need it.
So I think we'll get that on January 21st. I think they have not provided that, have not provided a lot of background yet, but I think that's what we'll get, and that'll be a chance to ask questions if we don't. And
Is that
dig
the
into
only
it.
chance we can? Of course, I'm traveling that day. That's the 21st.
Well, so there are two other chances. One is on February 12th. We have a joint meeting with us and Dover
Right.
and the regional school committee, so that's another opportunity. And the school liaisons, right, Mike, Paul, Doug, and me, right, the four of us, I think we'll set a meeting with Dawn in January, and that's another opportunity to
But the
talk about
February
it.
12th is a school.
It's a joint advisory committee meeting, Dover warrant committee
So we get
meeting,
to
and
talk.
school committee meeting. We do, we get to
Unlike
talk at
the
that one.
last
Yes, we get to talk at that one. It's, and really, it alternates, and I don't remember whose year it is as to whether it'll be held in the middle school, but whether formally Sherborn Advisory is hosting or Dover Warrant is hosting, I'll have to look and see which we did last year. So it really is a advisory or warrant meeting to which the school committee is invited. So absolutely, we all get a chance to
So
talk.
January 21, if we show up, we can speak. or we just
Absolutely.
observe?
No, absolutely. We can speak as long, I mean, I've got to coordinate with Peter and we don't want to mess up their meeting, but I'm sure they'll be happy to have our participation. And I bet you're going to ask about, is that meeting going to be recorded? And it is.
Sure, it will be.
And televised, so the general public can watch it,
So,
or Zoom, or anything?
yeah, so it's going to be, so I have to find out the logistics. It's typically happens at the middle school. And absolutely, they can record it so that it gets posted on YouTube. I don't know if they're set up in that room to stream it. It could be if they aren't, and it's good that you brought this up because it's a reminder to me to check. It could be that we should have the meeting here, say, where it could be streamed out into, I mean,
Ironically, that happens to be where Dover Sherwood Cable TV's housed.
So probably they're set up to do it.
I think they could throw
Yeah.
it
So I would think so. I just don't know the logistics in that building and which room and all of that.
I would prefer that be recorded also,
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with
even
that.
with the, yeah.
It wasn't last year, and I think that was unfortunate.
And I'm admitting some people here too, by the way.
Perfect. Thanks for doing that. Okay. So I anticipated most of where you were going, not quite all of it, but thank you. It's a good reminder for me to check with them and make sure that we get the logistics set up the right way. Let's see. Okay, that. And then also there've been a number of committee members who've asked about getting cell phone numbers of everybody else's, every other member. I'm happy to send an email around just to the 9 of us with everyone's cell numbers. I didn't want to do that without checking in. If anybody doesn't want your cell number shared, just shoot me an email and let me know, because in a day or two, I'll just put a little email together with everyone's cell numbers. I have them all, but it probably would be nice for everybody to be able to easily text and get in touch with everybody else. So just let me know if that's a problem. And I think that's it for me for advisory reports.
Can I just mention something as
Of course.
recording? I just didn't want, when people come in, I automatically mute them. So anybody in the audience, please raise your hand, because sometimes I'll mute people so we don't have background noise. So I don't want people thinking that I'm muting them to not have them speak.
Yeah, thanks. And if somebody, since we had this problem before, if somebody on Zoom does want to speak and we're not seeing your hand up, you can always unmute yourself and just jump in. just to make sure that we don't miss anybody. So other advisory reports, Paul, I'm guessing you have one?
The first is that same regional school committee meeting that Dan mentioned. He and I attended on December 3rd. School committee voted on their operating budget for 2026.
Oh, can you speak up a little?
Sure. At the regional school committee meeting, they voted on the version 1.0 operating budget. And overall, like their budget increase they're asking for is just over 2%, an increase over 25. And Sherborn's assessment is 324K, which is about a 2.8% increase over last year. And their key budget drivers that they mentioned were enrollment, salaries are up 3.4%, benefits are up about 8%, and transportation is up about 16%. And their timeline, like the next step in their timeline is the version 2.0 will be presented at the regional school committee meeting on February 4th. So it'll be the next time that we have a chance to see that. The other liaison report I have is from Town Forest. I met with Sean Stat, David Clean, and it's kind of a, maybe in a good way, kind of boring in a way in that their revolving fund from the sale of firewood basically covers all their expenses. So the committee, so they don't expect impacting the operating budget. Their revolving fund balance is estimated to be about 29K.
Thanks, Paul. Anybody else with anything to share?
I've had the pleasure of being with Sean yesterday and fire department and police department last week. And we did, as far as capital budget, vote for 2 cars. I can always send you the minutes. Corey Lincoln has them out pretty, so I'll send them without taking too much time here.
Okay,
We
that'd
did
be
vote
great.
on the police car, approve that. It'll be fun going over DPW and the roadway management. We didn't vote on anything there, and also a chassis thing for replacement on dump truck as opposed to buying a new one. So that was an interesting case. That was cool. And then fire department, ambulance, one of one. Needed some work and putting in and also big CPR. And I'll send you the costs and everything that we have.
Great.
And it's all part of what you've sent too.
The minutes should get posted on the website, but if you send it to
Right.
me, I can quickly send them
Right.
around to everybody.
That's
Can
about
you start by saying your liaison to police?
capital budget committee.
Capital budget.
So those are the items.
Who's the police? You are, yes.
And Laura is the alternate on capital budget, so you were there as well, right?
And Nora and I are fire.
So, but I had my capital budget hat on, and then we're meeting with Chief Ward sometime in the next couple of days to go over the other part of the budget. And I have a meeting, Marion Neutra and I are trying to set something up with the water and that piece of it, and I have some other ones to reach out to this week. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Nora. Doug,
So I reached out to the agricultural commission I've forgotten who the chair is.
Yep.
And have not had any response, so I'm
They-
not sure what to do.
so they probably don't have much, I mean, I don't think they have much of a budget. It's just if they have any issues that
I
are
also
coming out.
learned that the insurance advisory committee doesn't exist anymore.
And maybe that'll get started again.
And the last one is I have not heard back from the inspectors, but I'll move that.
Okay, perfect. Great.
Dan, also, I'm liaison for assessor's office. So Wendy is available, just it's you. Okay, great. But is she still consulting? But
Not with the tax rate set, only if the.
is that public information, the new tax rate?
Sure, yeah, it was public hearing last week.
Okay.
$16.58.
1658? Oh, it's come down from 1697.
Yep.
Right.
But your assessed value.
Yeah. Oh, no, I know. And our expenses are going up. So our taxes are going up.
Tax bills will be going up.
Tax rate was lowered as the.
And I saw
the
that,
values went up.
right.
And
It's
I'm
all
gonna-
about spending.
I'm going to talk about that.
Yeah, I saw
at the
that,
end.
and
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, I can help with that.
Okay.
Maybe we should-
Okay,
Happy to meet with you.
that'd be great. Thank you.
Anybody else? Yeah, Penn.
Yeah, so looking ahead, Stephen and I are going to meet with Chief Galvin on Tuesday.
Great.
I'm going to meet with Christina Gallant on COA on Monday. And then on Friday,
Shelley and I had a meeting, a long meeting with the library. And so they gave a very detailed presentation, and we gave a fairly detailed response. In a nutshell, there's the starting difference between the advisory guidance and their proposed budget is there's a gap there. They're proposing
Big
Um,
gap, right?
big gap, yeah. So they are asking for creation of a unbenefited position, taking a currently unbenefited position and make it benefited and creating a benefited position. So within their budget, not counting the increase to the town costs for the benefits, they're asking for an 11.2% increase. And we suggested to them that that would get a cool reception at advisory. Essentially, this is my perception of it. Liz talked a bit about this. This is their first full year in the new space, and they kind of wanted to see what they could do with it. And in consequence, they have run their staff ragged. They've kind of hit the limit. And in order to keep doing what they're doing, they feel they need more staff. But my perspective on it is, this may be too much detail for the moment, but a lot of what they do is self-generated. They sort of set their own goals. And so I think there's scope. It seems like there's scope for, coming to some sort of some sort of budget on their end that fits in with advisory.
We just asked that they think about creative ways to meet their staffing needs than what they have currently, or if that may result in reducing some of their programs, but they have a lot of programs. So.
Yeah, the numbers, I mean, they have literally hundreds of kids programs that collectively service like thousands of children. They have like something like 850 scheduled meetings in a year. I mean, it's really, they do a lot, and there's kind of a reason why everybody there is, there's, I don't want to diagnose burnout, but people are there working really hard. And as we said to them, actually, they said to us, something's got to give.
So hopefully when they come to do their presentation, we've asked them to kind of think about that
good.
in advance, so that doesn't necessarily look like what we spent an hour and a half talking about.
That's a great bit of liaison work to get that conversation started. That's great. Anybody else?
The only other thing I have is
Oh,
that
yeah.
I reached out to Jean Guthrie actually about the zoning board of appeals, which I don't think they have. Do they have a budget?
It's small. It's gonna be
Very
tiny.
small.
It's gonna be a tiny budget.
I think so. This is like scope creep, because I think you're the liaison for Farm Pond and she's also the contact for that. She just let me know that the revolving fund they're going to increase the number of non-resident stickers they're selling. They currently sell 150. They're going to increase it to 200, and that will make an additional 15,000 in that revolving fund. So
Okay.
I can forward that to you in an email. if you want.
Okay.
Like, do they know they can sell it, maybe?
I guess, and they must have like a wait list, so I think that they probably do have the demands.
I think it's
I
pretty strong.
anticipate that they
Is that
do,
right?
yeah.
And I had a note based on our meeting. I learned that if you're 65 or older, you can get a lifetime Farm Pond sticker for a single modest payment. So something to look forward to for you kids.
That's if you're a resident, right?
That is if
Yes.
you're a resident, yes.
Or you could still continue to pay the fee.
Yes, because paying insurance it's like a habit. I formed that habit.
And I'll just mention, I think Mike and I are gonna meet with Chair and Vice Chair of the Board of Health on Friday to talk about their budget. So that's on track as well.
And Paul and I are meeting with
Sean
on
Friday.
Friday.
Perfect. Oh, that's great. So this is all working the way it's
All
supposed to
hammered,
work. It's
yeah.
really good. It's really good. Okay. So that's great. So let's go to reserve fund transfers. So two requests, fire department for a little over 20,000 and town buildings for a little over 115,000. Just a moment's history on the reserve fund, particularly for new members. Yeah.
I think, were we gonna do and approve the previous meeting.
Oh, yes, thank you, thank you. Yep, yep. Yeah, thank you. Let me undo this. Thank you, Pen. Okay. All right, so we have minutes to approve from our October 30th meeting and October 6th meeting. The drafts were circulated. Did anyone have any changes to suggest to those draft minutes? If not, anyone welcome a motion to approve the minutes as circulated?
So moved.
Second.
Thanks. All in favor approving the minutes?
Aye.
All opposed? Great, okay.
We're
Excellent.
approving both as a package.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's just fine. Okay, so now on to reserve fund transfers. So just for newer members, just history on that. So every year the town allocates some amount of money in the operating budget as to set up a reserve fund with the expectation that some unexpected things will happen during the year. In recent years, that's been 300,000 that's been set aside. Often hasn't all been used, but things come up that weren't anticipated. Some piece of equipment breaks, something happens in a building that requires immediate repair that hadn't been budgeted for and couldn't have been budgeted for. And the then kind of reason that there's a reserve fund is that, so there's funding available for that. So there's some fire department things and town building things that happened. From my perspective, this is exactly what the reserve fund is for. We'll hear from Chief Ward and from Sean Colleen on, what happened and what the story is and make sure that it all sounds appropriate to us. But, this is exactly what the reserve fund is for, is to cover these kinds of unexpected things that wouldn't fit into a budget. I'll also just note that this is like a rare moment for advisory because the only actual authority that advisory has is the reserve fund. All the rest of it is just, we offer opinions about stuff and then town meeting decides what to do. This is the one spot where we actually, we can revel tonight in our power and authority and ability to, make these decisions. So Chief Ward, do you want to start? If you want, I can share the memo, or if you just want to talk,
Did you send a memo out?
I did. Everyone has seen it.
Excellent. So just for undo, maybe a little more background, is the reserve fund something that is created and then debited every year? Is it set around unused?
Yeah,
Like, what is it?
yeah, that's a good question. So money goes into the reserve fund. It often happens that something happens mid-year like this where there's an allocation that's appropriate. At the end of the fiscal year, there are year-end transfers where, one department might have been over budget by a bit, another department might have been under budget a little bit. So both the select board and advisory approve some transfers to sort of balance that out. And sometimes at the end of the year, money needs to be drawn from the reserve fund to cover. In recent years, not, because there've been enough vacant positions and things that the departments that were under had sufficient, funds to cover what was the departments that ran over a bit. Any remaining money, either unspent money at the end of the budget year, that's budgeted money, or the reserve fund, it rolls into free cash. And so that is one of.
Reserve fund is a little misnomer. That's not a fund, it's more of a budget line, an operating budget line. It's based on the fiscal year.
Yeah,
So
it
each year.
expires at the end of the year.
It
It
expires.
does not roll over. There's not,
That's
there's,
what I'm asking.
there's not like a $700,000 balance sitting there. At the end of the year, whatever isn't
Budget
used,
line,
it goes back to zero.
$300,000
Right.
called reserve fund, it's for unexpected.
Is 300,000 the annual amount we stick in there
Yes,
based on its whatever the percentage? of-
Past.
Yeah, it's a small percentage of the operating.
and that number has been different if you go far back, but for the last many years, it's 300,000 is what people have felt has been reasonable.
If it's
But-
not spent, it goes back in the general fund, it goes to free cash.
Yeah. So it zeroes out. There isn't a pot of money that
That's-
accumulates
that's what I
there.
was getting at.
Yeah. Okay. So Chief,
So we're before you tonight to ask for a transfer for engine 3. Engine 3 had basically a catastrophic failure of its power steering boxes, all of that fire. So the truck had to be towed to a repair facility in Shrewsbury, where it got fixed. And engine three, it's our tanker, carries 2,500 gallons of water. Got used on a fire in Sherborn just last week after it was fixed. We use it pretty regularly. Truck's 20 years old. So it's not, these weren't parts they could just order. They actually had to rebuild them and remake them because of the age of the truck. That's why we have such a high bill. The primary reason why we're asking for a reserve fund transfer, that's not a bill that our budget can cover. Our total vehicle maintenance budget is 22,000 per year. And unfortunately, this year with some other repairs that we've had, pumps and other things, we've already spent about 2 million of that so far due to some other issues with the apparatus over the summer. So that's the memo I submitted. I'm happy to answer any questions.
For Chief Ward.
How's it running now?
Great.
So last week it was good?
Used it a week ago today at a car fire in Western Ave. Everything was fine.
Are you using any of the fire blankets, by the way, on any recent of the car fires?
No, you know how you bought blankets and the nozzles last year?
Yes.
So we had a car fire in Western Ave on Wednesday. It wasn't electric, it was not an electric vehicle, but the fuel tank let go while we were putting the fire out. It wreaked havoc, we'll put it that way. We had to use the nozzle for,
Oh,
we actually had a guy catch on fire. Luckily he has gear on, he's fine, but that's why we got the gear, the gas, nobody splashed back on him. Buddy went over and patted him down, everything was fine, but we did use the nozzle, and the nozzle worked great. So,
can you explain what the nozzle was again?
it's a nozzle that we slide under a burning, it's supposed to be for electric vehicles, it's a nozzle that we slide under a vehicle to get the fire underneath the vehicle. Because it's a dangerous spot to put firefighters in, especially when a fuel tank ruptures in a car, and there's fuel, plenty of gas running under the car, it's even more dangerous. So we didn't use a blanket for that, we didn't really need to use a blanket for that, but we were able to use that nozzle, and it worked great.
Is that reusable?
The nozzle,
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
that was one of the capital budget.
Right,
That
yeah.
was in that same article,
Right,
that's why I
right.
mentioned that. So, again, it wasn't an electric vehicle, but it certainly helped us. With
So
that
then-
fire.
could you explain, like, so for the turnout gear?
Yeah.
Not to go off track, but
Go
it's
ahead.
interesting, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That was the new turnout gear and
It's a
then,
few years old. So we also voted on backup sets of gear. You remember that stuff hasn't
I do.
been yet?
Mhm.
But the gear that he was wearing is being evaluated. If it has to get replaced, I gotta pay for it now, about $4,000 a set now. But we go after the insurance company.
okay, that was my next question, because
Takes up to a year to get reimbursed by these insurance companies.
Uh-huh.
We can only get reimbursement for hazmat incidents.
Mhm.
That was a hazmat, it's a fuel tank let go, very complicated. But our wages for the members that responded, we charge them for the truck being used.
Mhm.
There's a federal rate set for the trucks for certain hazmat incidents like that.
okay, thank you.
We also have the DEP, which helps us determine it was an actual hazmat incident for the billing. So
Thank you.
Other questions for Chief Ward? So,
I just have one
Yeah,
question.
go ahead, Sean.
I'm just reading this. What is the life expectancy of these trucks?
So that's a great question, Shelley. So engine three was already supposed to, it was on the capital plan 2 years ago when I started to get replaced, and I pushed it off. I pushed it off because to replace engine three, the way it's configured now, would be 1.2 million.
Yeah.
So next year, we have a $70,000 article to put some money into engine three into the frame. It's not a replacement, they're gonna put it up on the lift, they're gonna blow some rod off of it, and they're gonna recoat it, fix a couple things. It's a pretty minor refurbishment.
That's
Hoping
for 27, fiscal 27, or
fiscal 27, not this budget cycle. Hoping that gets engine three to 30 years. Another 10. So for that truck, it depends on the vehicle, the manufacturer and all that. Engine three is a solid truck.
It's one
all
of
around.
the best trucks the town.
It doesn't owe us anything.
Okay. So
Maybe
something like it's worthwhile to invest in it to
Keep it going.
increase the longevity.
Yeah, exactly.
what else for Chief Ward? If not, anyone want to move that we approve that reserve fund transfer request? Okay.
Second.
All in favor?
Bye.
Anybody opposed? Okay.
Just in time.
I'm sorry, did I just miss something here that I should?
The duck-
My duck was quacking.
What is that clicking noise, by the way?
I'm guessing
This
it's
sounds
the,
like HVAC.
Ugh.
Over our head.
yeah. Okay, so Sean,
Why, you want to talk about HVAC?
No, I should have brought it up. I'm sorry I even brought it.
Different meeting.
yeah, but I would like to hear about river fund
so-
stuff.
The chief stuff is much more exciting than this, but I'll talk the mechanics of this a little bit. Since you kind of summed up the mechanics of reserve funds. And so, for context, basically everything on this campus up in the library is hitting the 24, 25, 26-year-old mark. And not a lot of people realize this, but this building, the police station, and the community center across the street, as odd as that might sound, all share a septic system next to the police station. And that's basically got a small version of a sewer treatment plant with it. So there's a set of pumps and a set of fans and everything that go with that. In the operating budget, we kind of cover most of that in the town hall septic. But then there's also a set of pumps and chambers down behind the police station down below, because all the plumbing's in the basement of that. So the system itself is regulated by DEP because it's quote. So it gets quarterly testing from a company that comes out. And they, it had some faults with the pumps. They needed to come and replace the pumps. Once we had them out, we knew we needed to do that. Once we had them out, there's some code compliance issues, because if you picture where the pumps are, that's all confined space, and you gotta wear hazmat stuff to get in there. And the wiring was not done to what the code should be now. So once they started touching it, the plumbing, the wiring, and the pumps all needed to be replaced. Longevity, and it makes it much easier to service in the future. So that if a pump fails, it's not gonna be $20,000, it's gonna be whatever the pump is, probably $1,000. So that price escalated quite a bit, much more than I would have expected. Certainly, you can appreciate the operating budget doesn't have anywhere near that to cover it. We only have a few $1,000s per year for some of these septics. So that's the first couple lines. There was basically the same thing happened with the pumps down at the police station. One had failed. When they went in to work on it, they realized, all right, this whole thing has to be done. They had a whole new wire to it so they could redo it. With the risk of not doing that, you can imagine where that sewage would have gone. It would have gone right to the well. DEP would have whacked us. It wouldn't be a good meeting. So those are the first two lines. Then this building, a lot of people don't realize this, was the first sprinkle building built in town. When we remodeled this in 99, 2000, we put a full sprinkler system in. We don't have, obviously, town water, everyone knows. So there's actually out front, there's a cistern, an 8,000 gallon tank, and a bunker with a set of fire pumps in it. The fire pump is still good, but its controller, after being in an underground bunker for 20 years, has basically succumbed to the moisture and that atmosphere that's down there. Again, the system was put in, it's debatable whether it was up to code then, but it's electrical code and NFPA code. As soon as anyone touched it, they had to upgrade the service and most of the wiring inside said bunker. So again, it really doesn't, it doesn't hit the level of what I would have had for a capital project. I certainly didn't have this price pinned on it. So some of it was expected, but the order of magnitude wasn't really, and I couldn't have possibly, been out in front of it. But it had, had to get fixed. We need to be in compliance. If the sprinkler system fails completely, that guy's gonna have a different meeting and we wouldn't be in here. We can't really operate the building without it. So it poses a different problem. So in this, we included it, what's been spent, and there's still some bills to come in. The controller's on order. And it'll get, rewired and done, I think.
Anything other than the controller that's still waiting to be done, or that's the last piece?
Right,
Yeah, okay.
correct.
And obviously, I
And
get that
and
the
it's
bill,
covered in here.
yeah, okay. And I get that the bills come with a lag, so,
Right.
not all the money's been spent yet, but it will be.
Right.
And it's on that score, hard price. There are bills coming in, but you know what the bills are going to be that are going to come in.
What's that?
That you said there's still bills to come in, and right, what all those, the number that's going to be on all those bills.
Yes.
No,
Is that?
Correct.
They're included here.
Correct.
yeah, they're all
Yeah.
included here. No surprises
Yeah, I
yet to
didn't,
come.
I didn't build it out.
No,
here.
no,
When I
that's
did
fine,
this
that's
to-
fine, yeah.
To Devin, Jeremy, I took,
Yeah, okay.
what's been spent on that line item.
Yep.
And what's due, what's
Okay.
ordered.
Okay,
There's
Okay.
a purchase order out there for that controller.
okay.
These were unanticipated. These came up mid-year.
Correct.
These were urgent. These were not anticipated items.
Right.
This was not a normal annual expense that
Not something that
just worked
could
on
have been
general
in
start.
the FY25 budget.
Is the
Yeah.
way the controller's being installed going to make it less likely that it will succumb to moisture in the future? Or is this just sort of every 25 years? It's happening?
Well, it's lasted 25 years. If we get that out of it, we're doing okay.
Okay, good.
'Cause, it's definitely not advised. It's almost not legal anymore to even do those bunkers. When you drive around the building and you notice the metal building outside of Jeremy's office, that's not just there for looks. That's the library's version, because, again, it's not a great environment to be sticking those things
Well, to that
underground.
point though, should we be doing this or solving some other problem? I mean, building another system. It's not underground.
Well, that would cost probably $500,000 or actually more. We got almost $1 million in that
$500,000
system over there. What's that?
Just
What we-
spend 30 seconds on what this thing is. I mean, it's the size of a dishwasher. What is it? How big is it?
The bunker,
No, the thing, the electronics.
it's a electrical controller for a pump.
You can't build a shed for 50 grand to put it in? I don't know.
How large is the concrete
I mean,
bunker
I'm
underground?
just wondering if you really need a bunker.
The bunker, it has to be down there, and you can't just go jerry rigging and wiring it, and it would be on the front lawn of town hall. It would look horrendous.
It's like 16 by 16.
It's 15 by 15.
The bunker is, yeah.
No, I'm talking about this mechanical, the electronic device.
Well, they have to be there. I can't, they have to be with the pump.
That's where the water is.
It can't be 100 feet away.
Oh, gosh, no. No, the power comes directly off that pole, goes directly underground into a bunker, and there's the pump.
And that's right, it's proximal to the cistern. It's right there. to-
Right.
to
I
get
get
water.
that the pump needs to be where the water is. The controller needs to be where the pump is? Seriously?
Pretty much, yeah.
It's very surprising.
Steven,
Two questions. Mr. Chairman, one is, do we know as we're here right now, what other things are gonna be popping up to consume the remaining reserve?
so
Um,
Jeremy might have some insight, but
I'm not aware of any other
Yeah.
issues for reserve fund transfer. Look at the history, there hasn't been a reserve fund transfer for the last couple of years that I'm aware of.
I mean, stuff comes up, but I don't think, given that it's unanticipated, I don't think anybody has anything on it.
Thank you. So
Most years it's not.
I just want to follow up with this request, and what I'm gonna say, I don't want it to sound overly critical in any way. But a lot of the things that are in the description remain compliant, need to be replaced due to age, electrical service was not compliant with electric code or NFPA. So my experience has always been that repair is always far more expensive than maintenance. So one question would be, was this on a list somewhere to be done? And if it wasn't, why not? And is there a maintenance program in place so that we can budget for these items and don't encounter surprise going forward? And I'm saying that, I'm going to repeat myself, not to be critical, but only to take it away as a learning experience. How can we prevent this on a going forward basis?
Right.
With a maintenance program that has a catalog that we know what's going to be coming up.
So we do have that, and it's a good question. And what we have is a company called Onsite Insight that came out and did an evaluation of all the facilities. And basically builds out a 20-year capital plan. You know, and a lot of that stuff is fluid, but for these specific items, you know, especially the septic pumps, we you know, quarterly, we have to maintain that. So the company comes out, and again, a pump that would normally be $1,000 or a couple $1,000, when the system is now 24 years old and you need to upgrade it, the upgrade costs a lot of money.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I would reply by saying the previous quarterly report must have shown that there was some deficiencies in the system. So I guess where I'm headed is, I'm not talking about capital. I'm talking about a maintenance program where you address things before there's a need for a repair. But it's not capital. It's just ongoing maintenance, like an oil change. Yeah. So that's my question. Is there a maintenance program for the town that anyone's thought about? You know, I imagine there is, but since this is my first year here, I don't know about it. And if there isn't one, it might be worthwhile to kind of address that. I mean, there are things in this building that are going to need to be swapped out before they need to be repaired. It's just proactive maintenance.
Because the alternative is things fail, then you have an emergency.
Correct. That's right. So it's preventative maintenance as opposed to a repair. So that's my 2 cents worth. Again, I'm going to say it one more time. I'm not being critical here. I'm merely trying to take away a learning experience from this one. Fortunately, there are funds available, but who knows what's going to happen in the next 6 months.
What's the answer?
I don't have a better, like,
Is there,
when
is
you're
there,
going to replace a pump, there's no maintenance you can do a pump.
I'm not talking about this one, I'm not talking about this one specifically. I'm talking in general. What's the program for the town to do maintenance?
I guess a way that I'm thinking about this is like, you know, onsite insight. It's been too long since I looked at it. I don't know how detailed it gets. So, you know, whether it's at the level of, you know, talking about this system and, you know, the lifespan of the system and when, you know, there'd be kind of you know, given the typical lifespan of the, you know, the fire suppression system and so on, you know, that has a lifespan of X and, you know, so at a certain point of time, you know, that would be something that we'd want to be thinking about, you know, budgeting for replacing. I don't know if onsite insight gets to that level of detail or it's more aggregate than that. But that I think.
Certainly does on life cycles and well beyond life cycles of anything.
Right. Right.
Capital budget meeting.
Right. But does onsite insight get to that level of detail or onsite insight is more aggregate?
Well, it predicts the end of life, and a 24-year-old septic pump is certainly way beyond the end of life.
And so,
That's somewhat a lot, yeah.
and so I guess then on
Having
Steve,
a report and acting on it.
oh, yeah, of course.
But we're acting on it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess,
Right now, it didn't fail. DEP didn't come out because it failed.
Well, I had a code failure.
What's that?
It was a code failure.
Excuse me?
Was there a code failure, electrical code failure?
No,
Oh, there was
but
not.
it has to be up when you upgrade something and you have to bring it to code. You have to bring it to code.
it's that something else failed and then as soon as you touch that, everything has to come up to code. I mean, I guess I mean, where Stephen's thing would go is whether we should be thinking, you know, with onsite insight, and I don't know what the answer to this is, but, you know, for these types of things that, you know, should be, I mean, you know, none of these things are easy, but, you know, should we be more aggressive about, hey, you know, there's this unit, it's 3 years past its 3 years past its kind of expected life, you know, based on what onsite insight or other, you know, other consultants have told us. And maybe we should be thinking about, you know, could last another 5 years, but maybe it's time to replace it before there's a failure. I mean, I think that's where Stephen's thing is going. And, you know,
Although
I,
we should have a much longer conversation about that.
yeah, no,
Because how
no,
else
indeed.
would I have paid for this? It's not in the operating budget.
Right.
And it's not necessarily in the capital.
Yeah,
So
But we
we
should-
here we're at right now, but going forward, yes, we need to.
Yeah.
really just improve upon.
yeah.
Feels like
I mean,
indeed.
it seems like there is you know, it seems like there maybe is a conversation to have about around that. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, Shelley.
I guess I see where this is going. I don't know what appetite, if Sean were to come to us and say, I have a
I-
24-year-old system, and I'm thinking it's 3 years past this date, like we
Yeah.
should replace it. We're not gonna approve
I-
that because it's working. And so I honestly think if he had some type of a system where he was like, I think you do, you just alluded to that, like when you started talking about systems being 24 years old, was that about the septic or was it about some other,
Everything on the campus.
everything on the campus is 24
Including the
years old.
squeaky thing over here.
Air handlers, all the things. So I guess my thought would be, maybe it even makes more sense if he has a spreadsheet and he knows what those ages of the system, maybe it makes sense to start putting money proactively into a reserve fund so that when those things fail, we've been slowly adding to a fund to replace systems and we have like a sense of what the cost is. I can tell you, after being on this for 1 year, I know that we're not gonna just give you money to replace something that's still working. We're gonna use it all the way till the grave and then we'll replace it unless it's like something, so I feel like there's gotta be somewhere in between,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And
I mean, that was why I hesitated when I was, you know, saying what I said a minute ago about, you know, it's complicated because
Yeah, no, I know.
you're right, you know, you can imagine the capital budget committee saying, well, you know, we're not going to come up with to fund that now. It doesn't, you know, there are other things that seem more urgent, but I think that comes back to what Jeremy said, you know, maybe there's a longer conversation to have around how that's done and just make sure that we're doing it in a sensible way.
So just macro question, 30,000 foot. We have all sorts of equipment in this town, HVAC, fire trucks, police cars, whatever. They all have an expected life. They're all gonna get replaced at some point. Is the strategy wait until they fail and then come to us? Is that, because that's what it sounds like,
I
and that's a
think-
dumb strategy.
I think the strategy has kind of moved around over the years, but I think there are plenty of times when that's kind of how things have been.
Who in the town is responsible for long-range planning? I'm talking about the next 5 to 10 years of what does this town need? Like,
So-
I'm not saying this is the case, but
Yeah.
the roof on this building is
So-
gonna fall apart
so I
in
think-
10 years.
so
Who's paying attention?
Here's my answer. I think that responsibility is shared. I think it's Sean, I think it's town administrator Jeremy, and I think it's also us. In that, you know,
We should be-
that we in capital budget should be doing more long-term planning than we're doing. I think
Sounds like-
the
Mhm.
kind of evolution of this committee,
Well, you
that-
should add to that capital budget, select board.
yeah, absolutely. I think often on this committee, we end up, you know, January comes and we get pretty into the details of individual budgets. And by the end of that, everyone's exhausted and there isn't a lot of time for conversations about longer term planning. And that may be something as a committee that we want to try to rebalance some to contribute more to that long-term planning effort. Boy, Sean, I had no idea. This is such a,
You said we had power.
It's a symptom of your problem. It doesn't sound like any one entity in town is responsible for long-term.
you know, the way the town is structured, and we'll come to this when we talk about governance task force stuff, the way the town is structured, authority and responsibility is very diffuse and very decentralized. And, you know, it's been that way for 350 years. It's not clear that that's the best way to organize things, you know, because it creates, you know, it creates a whole set of challenges.
Is that
Okay.
true of most small towns?
I think it's mixed.
I was just gonna say, is that true of most small towns?
No, not necessarily.
I think it's mixed.
So interesting.
The Sherborn,
Sherborn does not have a town government structure that was intentionally created. It's a real bother.
We-
It's a conglomeration of things that have happened over 300 years.
We have bylaws, we have special state legislation for Sherburne. And probably a bunch of other things that I'm not, thinking of, but there
Other
isn't.
towns don't do that.
Other
Plenty of
towns
times.
have intentionally decided to determine how they would like to have their government be structured.
They set up a charter.
Native benefit model. Halsted just recently updated their government structure.
Is that
So
something
they
we can do?
intentionally set about to say, this is the responsibilities, where they should lie. And make sure
Such a
there
good
wasn't
idea.
sort of overlap or conflict, they clarified.
This is the perfect setup for our next agenda item, which is my hope that as a committee, we ask the select board to reappoint a governance task force, since it's been 5 years since the last. And I think some of the issues that we're talking about here, some of the other issues last couple of years suggest that it would be a good time to do that. But before jumping into that, other comments on this? Let's go to Penn and then back to you, Stephen.
So I think, I think having the big conversation is a really good idea. I think that when we come there, I think the first item should be just a philosophical decision between the old Yankee, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And no, preventive maintenance is much less expensive than repairing failures. And I think people just have to hash out that decision, and then using whatever way they go, which, and personally, I would favor the latter, the preventive maintenance being cheaper. Then you hash out whose responsibility goes to what. But I think when the time comes, the first question should be, what is the ground philosophy going to be on the approach?
And that was a conversation that will involve a lot of people for the reason Shelley said, since, there would be certainly kind of an instinct of, hey, it's not broken, why are we going to spend a huge sum of money on this, right now? Stephen and then Nora.
To build on what you were saying, Penn, we don't want to create an emergency. This could have been worse than what it was. So I like to suggest, if we have the authority to I guess we can suggest things and nobody can listen. I mean, that's perfect. It happens at home. all the time.
That's why we're called advisory committee. We offer advice, which sometimes is taken and sometimes is not taken.
Maybe the appropriate departments could take a look now at what should be addressed as maintenance over the next 6 months before we run into an issue. Maybe there's something that's burning, that I say that in quotes, a burning issue that we should address while we have the financial resources available. Let's try to see if the system can work. I bet you have things on your wish list that you'd like to have maintained before they actually break down. We should, think about what those are.
That also is something that could land in a fiscal 26 budget, of course, that runs counter to the guidance that we've given.
In theory, the operating budget for town buildings includes such costs.
Right.
It's having sort of the planning and the information available to implement.
Nora.
All right, I'm just, forgive me that I'm asking this again. Did something break and then that led to everything? Or no? Am I missing some? Or nothing broke?
The fire pump controller
Fire
is
pump,
in danger of not working. It works right now.
okay, and
It's
this,
being replaced before it fails.
okay, and the septic system piece, same thing.
Same thing.
So, and then I'm just curious, who's doing the work? Just out of curiosity, I don't see a bill. Who's the company that does the work?
The was
Is
several
it on
different
it?
companies.
Okay,
The fire pump. The sprinkler company runs the fire protection.
okay,
And then there's an electrician that was working on that specializes in fire pump chemicals.
okay,
And then there's a company that the name slips my mind right now that does the compliance work for the septic system. And they brought in an electrician that we hired to do the pumps. And that upgrade, a different electrician, because one specializes in the confined space of septic systems.
okay. And again, out of curiosity, if this was something that we're looking at, and I'm I'm not beating a dead horse. Should this be something that should go on to next year's? Like capital? This shouldn't go on,
It's done.
Oh, this work is,
It's already
the
done.
majority of this work is completed.
So here's a question for you. The systems didn't fail. There wasn't a 5-alarm fire saying, let's fix this thing because there's sewage running down the street. Somebody went down and looked at it and said, hey, this might fail soon. We should fix it. Right?
There's 2 pumps and one was running continuous, so it was probably gonna blow. So they had to go in and repair that pump.
So
So the
Somebody
the
made-
entire system didn't fail, but there was.
someone
faults
made
in
the
it.
determination that this stuff should be replaced
Yes,
before it failed.
yes,
Got it.
so something was going wrong with it.
yes, but it didn't go into complete failure and
Okay.
trigger a DEP response and
Okay,
a bunch of angry letters, but it would have if we ignored it.
okay.
And what was the trigger for the sprinkler system? What was- I mean, someone just looked at it and said, this is old and corroded? or-
Several things happen. One, there's actually 2 sprinklers pumps. There's the main fire pump that feeds the whole system. And then there's what they call a jockey pump, which is a smaller one, which just kind of maintains the pressure in case there's any pressure drops. The jockey pump failed. So they came to work on it. And 2 things happened. One, when they opened the fire pump controller, they said that it's way corroded, it's dangerous, I'm not touching it. And who allowed this to be wired this way? It's all illegal. It should have never been like this. So fixing a wrong that came from the 1999 or 2000 time. I can't go back and understand why they did what they did, but it needed to be fixed.
Okay. Thank you for your answer. Thank you.
I just have one other question, so Sean. So these things are being monitored though regularly, it sounds like these systems?
Oh, yeah. They're
Yeah, so
both
it's not-
regular.
so
The fire
this-
pump gets tested.
So this is really just at the end of its expected life. It's been monitored, it's been regularly checked?
Yeah.
And
I
so,
mean, this,
okay,
this sounds like it got, maybe not all the way, but part way to what you were suggesting of catching it before it became the fire
Yeah.
alarm
Well,
fire.
I'm not that knowledgeable about this particular incident, but I'd be hard pressed to believe that this last inspection uncovered something that any previous inspection hadn't uncovered.
we should vote on this.
Sounds good. So you're
I second.
moving to approve the reserve fund transfer?
I do, yeah, I make a motion to approve it.
Second.
I second you.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Okay, great.
Just as a point of information, what would happen if we didn't authorize it?
If we didn't approve, it would cause some big problems for the town because the work's been done. And there are, state laws about not having budgets run, spending more than is budgeted. So it would, I don't think it'd be a constitutional crisis, but it would be a small town fiscal crisis.
You might want to talk to the liaison, people that have to meet with Sean next week.
It would be, I mean, and again, I think we, had a good discussion around, what are some important issues for the town. But at the end of the day, this is what the reserve fund is for, is to cover these kinds of things.
But I appreciate, that you're hitting on some weaknesses. that we need to improve.
So Chief Ward, Sean, thank you very much for coming tonight. I know there's probably a lot of other stuff going on tonight. And Sean in particular, thank you for being patient with all of our questions and helping us to understand this a little bit better.
And these 3 gentlemen were here last night till 9:30
I'm
too.
sure, Okay.
Let's go for the record tonight.
Yeah. I think I've been in advisory meetings that have gone, thanks, Sean, that have gone till
Thank
about
you.
11 or so. So I don't think we're going to hit that record tonight. Okay, so governance task force. So a little bit of background. 5 years ago, the town moderator appointed a governance task force that took a little over a year to talk to a lot of people in town government, a lot of the boards and committees in towns. They also did a survey of residents and all focused on how well does town government function and where does it not function so well? What works well in town hall, what doesn't work well in town hall? And to the point Jeremy made, what elements of the town structure facilitate good governance and what elements of the town structure don't. And, we just touched on some of those issues with responsibility for long-term planning, for example, being really diffuse and decentralized. So they made 5 years ago a number of recommendations. Some of them were adopted by town meeting. Some of them, I think the select board did. Some just kind of fell by the wayside. There was also a Collins Commission report in 2011 that was circulated around. I reread that this afternoon, and I don't know, you couldn't quite just change the date from 2011 to 2024. But if you did, a lot of things would still ring true in terms of some of the issues that they raised. So select board briefly considered whether this should be a warrant article. And I think their initial reaction a month or so ago is there's a lot of other stuff going on. They weren't sure that this, that it was urgent to do that this year. My view would be that it would be a really fine thing for the town to undertake it. Again, it would be probably a year-long process. Could very much track, what the town did last year with the town moderator appointing a governance task force. And I think Jeremy just highlighted some of the issues. I think some of the things that have come up in the last couple of years with some of the challenges, in my mind, relate to the diffuse structure we have and the fact that, our town administrator doesn't have a lot of actual authority in town and with respect to the rest of town government. And I think that can create some challenges. There will, of course, be a wide range of views about all these things, but I think a governance task force could solicit views. And I think a group of thoughtful people could put together a set of recommendations that could help move the town to making some changes that would improve governance. So I think it would be great, we'll have a conversation and see what everybody else thinks. I think it would be great if we sent a letter to the select board saying, hey, we think you really should this year, go ahead and ask and have a warrant article that asks them, sets up the moderator to appoint a governance task force. I also understand that there might be a citizens petition. I know there are other people who had similar thoughts, and might be that a citizens petition would bubble up to put this on the warrant for town meeting. In my mind, if we think that it's something we want to pursue, there can be parallel tracks, and maybe that's good because it would help encourage the select board to do that. So what I was hoping to do tonight was to have a very high level discussion about whether that's a good idea or not a good idea, any particular themes that people you want to include in a letter to the select board. And if there's a consensus that as a committee, we want to do that, I could draft a letter, which at our next meeting, we could look at, edit, adjust. And then, it'd still be in time to send to select board when the warrant's still open and they could include this. So I thought we ought to have a high level discussion about that and get a sense of whether people think that's a good idea, not a good idea. And then, we can do some of the actual work maybe at our next meeting. Doug, I think you were
Yeah,
first.
so at a high level, the 2019 report covers a lot of things. I don't want to minimize the work of it, but it's things like office hours, credit cards, a whole bunch of different things. But the really big issues are ones that we were hitting on earlier, like the town doesn't have a governance structure. The town doesn't have a charter. We haven't, after 350 years, decided who's in charge, basically. It's all abuse. These are the macro problems that affect everything. So if I'm going to make it up, a committee in town isn't functioning properly, there's no way to get them to function properly. Or, Jeremy doesn't really have any authority. He does a big responsibility, but he can't drive decisions or make decisions, really. You can recommend things. So I think we need to, if we're going to do this, I don't want a repeat of 2019. I want something that gets to the core issues of, are we going to have a town charter and a governance structure like hundreds of towns in the state.
I agree.
That's the issue.
I agree.
Otherwise, it's just a circle jerk.
Yeah, I'll let the last comment go, but with everything prior to that, I agree with that. I mean, I think, there are a number of models. There's a full town charter. There's also a step that's short of that of, for example, the town administrator becoming a town manager, which would mean the town manager would then have through bylaw would have actual authority over different parts of town government. So there are different levels and ways that could be done. But I completely agree with you that really, I mean, I also think that really is the core. I've got small things that if it were me, I would say, well, this and that maybe
But
could be
that's
done
the
better.
core issue,
But
right?
and I think many of the things that have been struggles that I've observed as issues in the town in the last couple of years, I think would have been handled more successfully if there were a different structure. Others, Penn.
Well, I think as an alternative to this, we could just say Sherborne's official motto now is "so far, so good." But I'm not suggesting that. I'm very much in favor of some sort of task force to look into this. And I'm with Doug. I think my first off is I think we should write the selectmen. I think we should do the letter. And I think that my take on it is, there are a lot of ways we could tinker and tweak and improve the way Sherborne does things, but the central issue is a matter of authority. And the authority in Sherborne is so dispersed that, the buck never stops anywhere.
Right.
And nothing quite gets ever fully done. And I think my thought would be when we write the letter to the selectmen, we should say, we think the primary focus of the government task force should be settling the issues of authority in town.
Laura.
Do we anticipate any opposition? I mean, in other words, what is the broad scope of belief about this decentralized way of being that we've had for
so-
200 years? Is
so-
that supported broadly in town?
So I'll offer a thought on that. Others may as well. One, just on doing a governance task force, I think, some people will say just, oh, we don't need that, everything's fine. Why stir the pot and, have people spend a year writing a report? We've got the 2019 report, we got the Collins report. We all know what the problems are, why do we need to repeat this? It's just, it's one more committee that's going to do, whatever. So I don't think it's necessarily a slam dunk that the select board would agree with us that this should be initiated. I think that's part of the reason that there's possibly a citizens petition to get, a warrant article about this on, in that if the select board is reluctant on their own, I know there's certainly some support on the select board. I don't know how much. But that if there is reluctance from the select board on their own with citizen petition, that can put an article on the town meeting warrant. As for the structure of town, I suspect there would be opposition. I think there is a group in town who, this is how we've always done things. Back in the day, everything worked. Yeah, there's some problems, but, everybody gets along. We can have a conversation. Things get worked out. And, as in any organization, there are people who are going to like and be happy with the current structure, and change is gonna, be beneficial in some ways, but there would undoubtedly be some people who would feel that the change, would undo something that they like about the way the town works. So I don't think it's a slam dunk with, such a task force is appointed. A year later, they say, let's develop a town charter, let's have a town manager form of government. And everybody in town says, yeah, absolutely, that's great. I think
No, we
there'd
have
be.
to make the case if that looks like the right way to go.
So absolutely. And so, I mentioned that because, that would be going, a pretty great distance. And there would absolutely be opposition to that. I think part of what a governance task force would do, though, is not only think about these issues and talk to people and figure out what a path would be, but they would also be doing a lot of talking to people and socializing it and making the case and building support for it. Yeah, Mike.
I mean, it's not even guaranteed that the task force would come out and say, we want these things, these things.
Indeed, it's
It,
not.
it could be, they end up saying in large part, what is
Yep.
happening is good and,
Yep.
here's some tweaks. I mean, so,
That is possible.
so I mean, I don't see a potential downside to at least having this group do this work, formulate some ideas and, kind of like us, it's just recommendations anyway. So
Yes. Yep.
there's not much of a downside. Is there a financial cost to this? Or, I mean, it sounds like this is just volunteers, so.
The cost is minimal. The last one, it's volunteers. They did a survey. It was a price. I think it was like I don't remember exactly the survey. So, there might be some small costs.
Sure.
It'd be de minimis.
So who decide, I mean, it seems like kind of what happens is largely determined or could be determined by who's on the task force.
Yep.
So who decides who's on the task
So the
force?
last time around, the town moderator appointed people to the task force. So that's what was done last time. And that would be, yeah, Jeremy.
Yeah, just back to the cost. If there was a need to do some study or hire someone to help, there are grants available that you could pursue.
Hmm.
Maybe not that grants that come around every late summer.
Oh, that's
Are available.
okay.
Earns a salary every day.
Yep.
Yeah, Stephen.
I think in the letter that gets drafted, it might be worthwhile to spend some time on answering the question, why now? Is there an event or a series of events that's causing the recommendation? Has the town reached a particular tipping point that it should rethink its form of governance? I think that it would be helpful to have in the letter some argument as to why now is the right time.
I mean, one mechanical answer to that is that in the 2019 task force, they said, we don't think this should be a standing committee. The town doesn't need another committee, but you should do this again in 5 years. And that would be now. That's the mechanical answer.
Did they has the town adopted any recommendation other than that one from the previous letter?
Well, they haven't yet adopted, so first off, they haven't yet adopted that recommendation. That remains to be seen. And of the recommendations, there were a number that pretty quickly went to town meeting and were approved. And things like, the treasurer being an appointed rather than elected position, combining the treasurer collector, those were sort of structural things that were all in there. And so, there were things that were in there that were done. There are also some things in there that I think weren't fully embraced. Yeah.
You guys have been on a lot of committees, haven't you?
Can I just respond? I think the tipping point is our average tax bill going up now to 18,000 per household. And, last year's budget was 33 million, and it's not about, I feel like saying, it's not about the assessments, it's not about the tax rate, it's about the spending. And it's Sustainability Committee for Finance, it's a financial sustainability of our, of the residents in town. And it's, houses to keep going up and up. At some point, what's the tipping point? Average tax bill of $20,000?
Is it knowable how many towns operate this way in this
Yes,
very rate?
Yeah.
How many?
I don't know off the top of my head, but there are inventories.
So
The town government structure.
by analogy, 30 years ago, my father, as a Wellesley resident, did an analysis of their light plant, which is the electrical power distribution. He analyzed every town in the state that had their own light plant. And Wellesley was the only one in the entire state that managed it in a certain way, but the details don't matter. And basically showing that if we just managed it this different way, it meant $1 million a year in perpetuity to the town. It was an easy vote at town meeting. So there may be an analogy where we could look at other towns, how are other towns organized? Is there a more efficient way that's actually going to save money? Because that may actually, to your point, go straight to tax bills.
If I were, and any of us on advisory would not get appointed to that committee. So you can't.
You mean the task
can't-
force?
To the task force, you can't do both. But if I were on that task force, I would start with, well, let's do that inventory of, who's doing what. And and, see what we learn from that. So, my guess is that's something that they would do. I'll make a note of that because that could go in. Could be some way that would get into our letter. Okay, so I'm sensing general support and sensing a general agreement that it's these big picture kind of issues of authority and so on. As compared to some smaller thing, that's the primary focus.
Yeah.
So, all right, so I don't think we need to keep talking about it tonight. So, why don't we take a vote? Why don't we take a vote to draft a letter to the select board to, ask them about this? And then, we'll get a text and deal with it. But I think it'd be helpful if we actually took a formal vote tonight. If somebody wants to move, say that the committee draft a letter to the select board requesting that they include a warrant article initiating another governance task force.
With a focus on,
With a focus on the issues that on the authority issues that we talked about.
so moved.
Second, okay. Any other discussion? Everybody in favor?
Right.
Okay, great. Okay. So I will do that, and I may, can't have everybody work on the letter, but I may reach out to a couple of you with drafts to get some reactions, and we can, do that in kind of a small way. Okay. So that's great. All right. So the last thing on our agenda was what I was calling big picture budget stuff, as just to kind of lay out, particularly for new members on the committee, just lay out some big picture stuff. In January, we will get deeply into the specifics of individual department budgets, and it is easy in that process to lose track of the big picture. And the planning, the long-term planning piece is a really important piece for our committee, and I think for the town more generally. And it's one area where I think the town would really benefit from doing more longer-term planning than it has been doing in recent years. So I've got 12 or so slide, a quick thing that just thinks through some big picture budget issues for the town. And then I've got that 5-year projection. So my effort at a contribution to longer term planning of doing a 5-year budget projection. We don't need to go through that spreadsheet in detail, but I just wanted to share enough of it. So since I sent it to everybody, if anybody wanted to play with it and start doing scenarios, you could. And a couple other things I was just going to highlight. So if that sounds like a good plan to everybody, I will do a screen share and pop up this doc. Okay, all right. All right, so I think everybody knows these basic facts, about a $34 million budget, $7,500 per capita. As Nora just highlighted, average tax bills in 24, 18,705. And this I borrowed from a document Jeremy did, so he gets the credit for putting this really nice pie chart together. This is, there are many ways to break down town expenses. This is one that I really like, which highlights that schools represent, shows here 58%. It's actually more than that because the insurance and benefits for Pine Hill employees are in that insurance and benefits line rather than in the schools line. So school's a big chunk. There are some items over on the right, like debt and interest, transfers to OPEB, state assessments, insurance and benefits that are hard to control on a year-to-year basis. There are policy decisions that can be made that would affect, say, the insurance and benefits line, but hard to control that on a year-to-year basis. And then what's left is, public works, public safety, general town government, making up, a little over 20% of the budget. So it's a picture I think people have seen, but it's one that's just worth coming back to and remembering sort of what are the pieces that we're talking about. And if you want to think about that $34 million budget, where are most of the dollars going? Just as a reminder, about 90% of the revenue comes from property taxes, and the remaining 10% comes from excise taxes, state aid, assorted fees. So very, very dependent on property taxes. And primarily that is, residential property taxes rather than commercial. There are other towns that have a much bigger commercial base and benefit from that, but that would not be Sherborn. So here's a chart that I think both tells an interesting story and maybe also in a way can get people a little bit mad. So the black line here shows operating budget since 2014, indexed to 100 in 2014. And the orange line is a price index I pulled from government reports of what's happened to the prices of things that state and local governments buy. So that would include wages, materials, all the things that state and local governments do. So the kind of message here is that over the last 10 years, these things have risen about in line. So the operating budget of the town has risen about in line with how nationally costs of what state and local governments do have increased. This does not mean that the level of spending is, where necessarily people would think it would be. But if you just look back at increases over the last 10 years, the increases are, about in line with the degree to which costs of what state and local governments, at least nationally, do have increased. All right, so Nora's point, this is going to make Nora's point on tax rate. So tax rate, of course, right, it's tax rate per thousand, it's total dollars of spending divided by total property valuation in town times 1,000. Town meeting set spending, property values, valuations come from assessments. And the key thing is here is in the tax rate is set to raise the funds that town meeting has already decided to spend. So, the tax rate, to use the econ geek term, is a residual, really. It's the spending that town meeting settles on that really is the main event. And then the tax rate is just whatever it needs to be given property valuations to raise the funds that the town has already decided to spend. So, individual tax bills, it's the tax rate times your property valuation. And I spun up a couple scenarios just to illustrate what drives tax bills. So, the top above the line, these are just the formulas from the last page, but the scenario is suppose spending doesn't change from one year to the next, but everyone's property valuation increases. So if that's the case, total spending doesn't change. If property values increase, then from the first equation up there, the tax rate's going to go down. So the tax rate goes down, but if property valuations went up by the same amount, tax bills don't change. So change assessments, but don't change spending. On average, tax bills aren't going to change. On the other hand, if spending goes up, but assessments don't change, if you work through the arithmetic of it, you end up with an increase in tax bills. So if you want to understand what's happening to tax bills and how much they're increasing, it's all about what's happening to spending. And if you track a time series of increases in town spending and increases in average tax bills, those percent changes lie almost on top of each other. So I think it is easy, and I think everybody on this call already knows this, scanning who's in Zoom land. But it is easy, I think, for people to go down the rabbit hole of thinking that somehow their assessment or the tax rate has some important influence on their tax bill. And really, it's spending that is determining it's changes in spending to what's happening to tax bills. So, and then here's another similar picture. So here, the average tax bills in blue, consumer price index is in orange. So average tax bills have indeed increased quite substantially over the last 10 years. You can see in particular at the very end, the very sharp increases of the last couple of years, which absolutely have gotten attention, I think, from a lot of people in town, and I think has caused some significant pain for a lot of people in town with big increases in tax bills. That being said, over the last 10 years, the increase in tax bills have been about in line with how much the consumer price index has gone up, or about in line with inflation. Again,
You have to get that CPI in.
this is Sherborn.
Okay.
This is just Sherborn. Yeah, of course I did. So again, this doesn't say anything about the level of spending. And, we could, there would absolutely be people who would say, well, that's all fine. But the level of spending is higher than it should be. We're spending money on things that the town doesn't need to spend money on. That's absolutely an argument somebody could make. But if you look back at how have things changed over the last 10 years, on average, tax bills have gone up about in line with overall inflation.
And then can you just, because I forgot to add that, like, can you just, and maybe you're talking about it a little bit, and I see 2.5 coming up, which is great. If you don't, it's all things being equal, if there's no growth. So if you don't have more
Right.
properties coming on.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, I'd love to see that laid on there, and the percentage of properties increased over that 10-year period was 5, or whatever it is.
Yeah, it was
in the
pretty
town,
small.
Because we're
It's
looking
Yeah,
at
because it's
like, what
very
is our
limited
revenue? Yeah.
growth,
Yep.
Yeah, we've had a couple of 40Bs and, over
Yep.
55s, and, but
So-
really it's been limited new growth, like new income.
I'm
New
gonna-
growth is new income.
I'm going to show,
Okay.
in the
thank you.
5-year projection spreadsheet has the numbers on that. Pen?
Well, it sort of nutshell that a little bit. With most kinds of new growth that could be available to us, the tax revenue would go up more than the incremental costs would go up, which would
Right.
in theory drop everybody's tax bills or
Yep.
increase, avoid tax increases. So that's why these things track for us, but we're still in trouble.
Yep. No, right.
And just, can I, in a
This-
single family home, between $2 and $3 million would generate between $30,000 and $40,000 for a single, okay. That's
It's the quality of the growth, right?
Mhm,
versus
you want-
the-
And also, right, for Sherburne, with no, town water and sewer in town center, that puts a real limit on any significant commercial development in town. And if there were town water and town sewer, there could be, there'd be thoughtful ways that, there could conceivably be additional commercial development in town center, which would be a revenue generator as well.
But isn't that the whole thing? Like, I sat in on a select board meeting about the whole water district and that the community that's going up right by Framingham, Natick and-
Coolidge.
Yes, on Coolidge, yeah, and it seems like there's just all kinds of politics about that. So people want lower tax bills, but they don't want to change the character of Sherburne, and they can't really
Yeah.
have it both ways, right?
So I think that's a really good way to put it. I mean, I think about, in Sherburne, we all want, really good schools.
Yeah.
We want, many people, want the very low density rural character, and people want low taxes. And it's kind of pick two. You can't, we're on a path where you can't support all three of those.
It's just a problem that you put those variables together, and they don't
Right,
solve.
right,
So,
right.
We'd have to have low taxes before we could be in a position to try to support low taxes. So
And,
we're
and
behind the 8 ball on one of the three already.
and on your point about, the water for the Coolidge Street projects being controversial, absolutely there would be, and has been for a long time, a lot of controversy about town center water, where there've been, various times when people have tried to move that forward, and it has never happened because of the opposition. I happened to recently be flipping through some old town annual reports. There was a annual town report from 1917, and there was
17?
1917, and there was a proposal to do public water in town. They came to town meeting. It was $45,000, and the town said, too much money, we're not interested. Not going to do it. And there've been, in the 107 years since then, there've been a number of other efforts to do that, and none have been successful.
Mostly because of cost. I mean,
I think it's
Infrastructure?
partly cost, because doing it would be would be a lot of money. And I think it's also, if there's water, there can be more development. And if you want the town to stay, the way it is, one way of helping to make that happen is, not to have water in town center. And, I think a lot of these proposals are not about water, all throughout town, but just in town center.
Water still has to come from the ground. So there's still the issue, water just doesn't magically appear, right? So you still have to, Dover has wells, individual wells, but they also have town wells. So they're all coming from the ground. And we
Right.
still have septic. So
So-
then you have MWRA, so then you'd have sewer bills for people that are
Right.
looking into town sewer going into Boston, but just, sorry.
Yeah.
That's all.
Actually, we had 2 inches of water appear magically today.
It's,
I know what you're saying. Anyway, but I think that a little bit of background, because we covered the water district. Thinking, people are worried about putting water and sewer downtown while when the town is still open to 40B developments. Because if the water and sewer were put in there, that would open the door for very considerable developments that would be potentially out of the town's control. If we get into Safe Harbor with the Cool Street projects, that takes that side of it out of play and maybe makes it opens the door to development, putting water and sewer downtown, but opens the door to doing that with control by the town over potential development.
Zoning then becomes the tool.
And kind of back to the whole thing about centralizing responsibilities and role a little bit more, you would then have, presumably, one of those roles and responsibilities could be to think about the kind of development you want to have. As opposed to just sort of fighting about the idea of development or not, but being very deliberate about the kind of development you want to have that still preserves the character of what we want Sherborn to be, right? So.
And so in principle, the planning board and CBA would be doing some of that. Zoning Board of Appeals and the town planner. Heidi Doyle is town planner. All right, so a couple other things. All right, so Prop 2.5, to just talk about that for a minute. It is complicated, confusing, maybe not the best written law, but here's a graphic for understanding it. So it's a thing that runs from one year to the next year. So you look back at last year and you say, what was last year's levy limit, which is not last year's tax bill, but it's this concept of a levy limit, which puts a cap on the amount of property tax that a town can raise. You start with last year's levy limit, and then you get an automatic 2.5% increase. Part of why it's called Prop 2.5. So, the lower light blue bar would be last year's levy limit, or what they're calling the levy limit base. If you want to then know what's the levy limit for this year, you add in 2.5%. And then to come to Nora's point, you add in revenue from new growth, where new growth is new construction in town. So a new house that goes up, a new business that goes up, and the new growth here would be the implied tax revenue from those new properties in town. So that gets added on to the base of, the maximum amount that the town would be allowed to tax. If there's an override, then, that would add to it. And then finally, one adds in any debt exclusions, which in Sherborn, when the town has borrowed in recent years for capital projects, that debt has been approved in a way that excludes the debt service on that debt from the Proposition 2.5 limits. So that means that, if there's $1.7 million in debt service that's excluded debt, that 1.7 million doesn't count towards the town's levy limit. So you add up all those pieces to get this year's max allowable levy, which then says that, that is the maximum amount that the town can raise in property tax revenue. So there are all these pieces that build up so that you get kind of over time a rising line that is the maximum amount that the town may raise in property taxes in aggregate. That line, the slope of that line, or the increase in that line, comes from the 2.5% automatic increase from any new growth, revenue from new growth that would push it up, And if there's a debt exclusion, a new debt exclusion, that would push the line up. So that sets the maximum amount.
What's the override?
So if a town, suppose a town's tax levy has risen up to that maximum amount, but the town wants to spend more than that. State law would say you can't do that. That's Proposition 2.5. But the voters in a town can approve an override, which says you can spend $300,000 more than the levy limit. And then, that permanently raises
warrant a town
the line. Yep, it'd be a warrant at town meeting, and it would then go to the voters in May for a town election.
Could you give the recent examples then?
Well, there haven't actually
Hasn't been an operating override for a while.
15 years or so, I think, like early, mid-2000s, I think there were some operational overrides.
Annually, there are debt exclusion overrides.
Right, if you look back at the ballot, at the election from last May, every capital item that was on the ballot was asking the voters to approve excluded debt. So all of the debt that was borrowed for those capital items fell into this category of excluded debt or debt exclusion. That's not the way all towns do it. Some towns issue debt and the debt service falls within the Prop 2.5 limit. Sherborn, for some bunch of years, has done, for a good number of years, has always done excluded debt. And there's been a conversation in the last couple months about, should Sherborn start shifting a bit away from that and start doing some of the debt as, within the Prop 2.5 limits rather than.
Because one's uncapped
outside.
and one's capped, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, Penn.
I have three sort of structural questions. So if the town votes for an override, not a capital one, but just we want to.
Operating budget override.
Am I right that you said that resets the base for the following year? Okay.
Typically, those operating budget overrides are permanent.
Are they capped in
There's
any
such a
way?
thing called an underride.
Mhm.
You can move it down, the same process, but
And
Right.
overrides capped in any way?
yes, to the levies.
So if you look at this graph, see the levy ceiling line at the very top? That levy ceiling, which really isn't relevant for Sherborn because it's way, way, way beyond, the max.
2% of
It's
the assessed
two,
value,
two, 2.5, right?
2.5% of the assessed
Right.
value.
So,
It's a big number. Big, really big budget.
right, it's way beyond where budgets are, but that's the other way that they got the 2.5 into the legislation.
And the final question, thank you. On new growth, so I know we've lost properties from the tax rolls, some big ones. What if the additional growth plus those losses is negative?
I think when those properties come, like Milburn Farm, when it comes off the tax rolls, Jeremy, correct me if I'm not saying so, but I don't think there's any adjustment to the Prop 2.5 formula.
There isn't. If anything,
One way or another.
it affects your tax rate.
Right,
It affects the value.
because there's less, here's a property that had been paying, that is now paying less property tax. And so, the town spending has to be covered by everybody else.
It doesn't adjust. the levy.
Is that clear?
No, but where's the levy limit? Where do you find it?
Well, I'm going to show you numbers in a minute,
Oh.
but so we were talking about this before. There's the DLS is Division of Local Services. So if you Google DLS Data Bank, that is a website that the state has that has vast amounts of information on all 350 financial and municipal finance information on all 351 towns. So a lot of the numbers that you're going to see on my spreadsheets in a minute, I pulled from there. So you could go look at, what is Sherborn's, what are other towns, max allowable levy. So, all right, I think the top point here is pretty clear that, the Prop 2.5 is about the maximum allowable levy. It's not about how much taxes can change unless you're at the levy limit. If you're at the levy, if taxes are at the levy limit, then you can only rise in line with that. But if tax levy is below that, things can rise faster than that, which is why tax bills have gone up more than 2.5% in the last couple of years, because we have been below that. And the key term of art is what is called excess levy capacity, which is the maximum allowable levy calculated in the way we just talked about, minus the actual levy. And in Sherborn, for quite some time, that excess levy capacity was pretty significant or sizable. And so that meant, if there was a year like last year or the year before, when inflationary pressures pushed spending up beyond 2.5% and beyond 2.5% plus the new growth adjustments, that was okay with Prop 2.5. It didn't run into any issues with Prop 2.5. Given those large spending, the large budget increases in recent years and the accompanying increases in the tax levy, that excess levy capacity has been shrinking. And we are now getting closer to a point where the actual tax levy is getting pretty close to the maximum allowable levy, meaning excess levy capacity is moving down towards zero. And in the 5-year budget model, there are projections of that, highly uncertain, highly sensitive to assumptions, but as a planning tool, gives a sense of where we are and where we might end up on that. And the summary of that is this picture, which is pulled from that 5-year spreadsheet. So the red line here is an estimate of the maximum allowable levy. The blue bars are the actual tax levy, total millions of dollars that the town has collected. And if you look to the left of the vertical black line, you will see space between the blue bars and the red line, meaning that there was excess levy capacity. And if you look to the right, in 26, that excess levy capacity is getting smaller. And by 27, that excess levy capacity has actually gone negative. So on this projection, which is probably not what's really going to happen, just think of it as a planning tool, that on a particular scenario that I created, by fiscal year 27, the town would either need to go to the voters for an override, operating budget override, or would need to constrain the budget, more than what's assumed in the scenario that I put together. And, then the situation gets worse and worse in subsequent years. Yeah, Penn.
What happens if if the override vote fails? If an override is necessary?
Then the budget has to.
Can't spend the money.
Yeah, then the budget has to comply with Prop 2.5. I mean, those are the rules, that either the town approves an override or you don't spend it.
That's happened in Melrose.
Yeah.
That happened in Melrose. They can't get an override passed.
So a number of towns have had that issue with the inflation in recent years, right? In Prop 2.5, not indexed for inflation. It's, if inflation's raging at 9%, and that's pushing up wages and costs, Prop 2.5 still says a 2.5% increment to the max allowable levy. So I think a lot of towns in the last couple of years have gotten into a situation where they hit the maximum allowable levy, gone to voters for overrides. Some towns have said yes, some towns have said no.
But it's always fun.
Okay,
What's next?
all right. So, and then just for kicks on the scenario that I did, here's what would happen to the tax rate. Tax rate would be going up in coming years on the scenario that I did. So let me show you that scenario and get this other. Okay, so here is this, just a second. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on the spreadsheet, but I did this, put together this 5-year budget model. Did this a couple of years ago and then got it updated. I shared it with everybody. So it is a tool that anybody can use if you want to try your own scenario. And the way this is set up is basically you put in the numbers in blue for assumptions for how much overall spending is going to be going up, what's going to be happening to property valuations, what's a new growth adjustment, what is excluded debt service going to be, get all those numbers in, and then the spreadsheet grinds through. And here's some other, does a bunch of calculations, to calculate what the implied tax levy would be, given the implied valuations, property tax revenue that would be raised. And then a panel that has some Prop 2.5 numbers to do a calculation of excess levy capacity. And what you can see is that in fiscal 26, excess levy capacity drops down from 700 and some odd thousand to something under 500,000. And then in fiscal 27 on this scenario, probably the scenario is wrong, but on the scenario, excess levy capacity goes negative, and the town would either need to constrain spending relative to what I built into the scenario, or would be looking at an override. So there are a couple other tabs here. There's an operating budget tab, which has opportunities to put in estimates for what's going to happen to spending at Pine Hill School, at the region, so the school spending, and then regular town government, and other elements. My scenario, you could plug in a different scenario and come up with a different set of numbers. So, anybody can play with this and, see where things go. There's also a tab where I did a bunch of stuff to work out debt service and excluded debt and so on and so forth, which then those operating budget lines and the debt service lines, feed through into all of this. And, so it's a tool for doing scenarios. So the main message here is, with sort of business as usual for Sherborn, with sort of budgets going sort of in line with what they've been, with a bit of a downward pressure from lower inflation. We'd be in the situation in fiscal 27 of having a really, really tight budget year. And this tracks very closely with mock-up that Jeremy did for fiscal 26 a month or so ago. And, this is just kind of building on that and adding in some additional years. And, Jeremy and Deb Seifring have been very helpful as I was putting this together. But in terms of, our committee doing some longer term planning, here's a tool, that we can all play with if you want to try some scenarios. Stephen.
Some insight on this. Is our revenue mix in line with other towns similar to us? Meaning, I'm making this up. Real estate taxes makes up 90% of the revenue. There's another 10% of excise taxes, permits, and stuff. Are we in line with other towns with that mix?
Yeah, sure, it's in line, similar to Dover or Carlisle. There's other communities that have different demographics where they might get more state aid. Sounds like Natick have more commercial growth. But your size, yes, that make up of vastly residential property taxes, your revenue, yeah.
So a way to raise revenue is seeing who's consuming the services, and user fees of some sort could raise some revenue, I suppose. I have never looked at the school budget as an example. Are there any user fees in the schools for buses, athletics, things like that? Does the school budget raise the revenue other than for grants or?
So I can say just a little bit, because they do rent out some of the space in the schools for, outside groups, and they raise a little bit of revenue from that. Whether they're charging rates that are, market rates or not, I have no idea, but they do raise some.
They don't charge a bus fee. Do
Somebody with kids on.
I only bring that up because I got caught behind one of the buses the other day and I was going to do a service, so I wasn't sure. if people
So,
paid.
Mike, no bus fees.
I don't think there's a bus fee, but there's like an athletic fee that pays for buses to take kids to athletic events.
Yeah.
But it's.
Normal
It's gotta be
transportation.
minuscule.
No, it's,
Sure.
there's
I have no
still,
idea.
yeah. Still charge for taking the bus.
And then the question
Would be
is,
municipal fee charge,
are they even very full once you get to a certain age of child that wants to drive their car to school and not ride the bus?
Well, the middle school and the high school share a bus, I believe. Well, it doesn't really make a difference. You still have to pick up, even if it's one child.
Yeah.
The topic is where to get more revenue, that's all.
It's called thoughtful growth.
So
And our
that's
biggest,
a longer discussion. But yeah, it'd be nice to get more revenue.
it's, so my question was in regards to that, on that line where you had, oh, you're moving it on me. The new growth adjustment, where you're getting that, oh, you just moved it on me, sorry. Where you're getting those percentage, like 3%, like what does that really constitute? Is that based on like 20 40B
So,
projects, or is it based on a couple of houses?
I think what Dan's using is some averages from.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, so if you do the average from 2014 to 2024, the, average revenue generated by new growth is 261,000. But that average is pulled up by 1 or 2 years a while ago, and there was a bunch of stuff. So, my estimate going forward was about 150,000 a year. If Coolidge project happened, that be a little while to look out there, but that would be a big change. That would change this, that would change the scenario. If a number of some of the 40Bs or other projects, happen and get built, that would change the scenario. So this is a scenario where, I haven't built in a lot of revenue coming from new growth. This is a pretty this is where it's been, hasn't been a lot of new growth. There are things that, could happen and, could easily, tweak those numbers and put in, your guess of how much, might Coolidge amount to and, see how it would affect.
we have such a
would
denser
affect the
population
numbers.
there, you have more, there's gonna be then probably more likely school
Right.
impact.
Right, you'd probably want, if you were gonna be really careful about it, you'd want to think about the new growth, but you'd also want to think about some of the expense lines.
Mhm.
Stephen,
So could you flip back maybe to your third, I think it was your third slide, you had a chart with the rate of growth on the expenditure side.
from the, not in the spreadsheet, but from the other document.
Yeah. Because it seems, at the risk of being obvious here, you have multiple levers to pull. One is the reasonable growth of adding real estate into the system, but the other is arrest the slope of the line of the increase in expenditures. And hopefully, in the last couple of years, we had inflation that was abnormal. We can flatten that line a bit. But, it's cutting into expenditures is like the self-fulfilling prophecy of, creating a bad product. And there's just so much you can cut before you get into the marrow of the bone. So I'm not an advocate necessarily to keep cutting expenditures or
Yeah, okay.
not maintaining the level of services that the town needs to maintain.
And some of them are already built in, like the union for, the cost of living adjustments for school, for fire, for police and for town, and that's always gonna be built in there, right? I mean,
I think, if I may, when we have the big picture discussion on how to do this, I think, one of the things that Jeremy's provided me with are comps with Carlisle, and I found them really interesting because I'm gonna go off from memory, but Carlisle's a little bigger than Sherborn. The average, I think the household income is higher in Sherborn than in Carlisle. The average property, I think, is assessed $100,000 more in Carlisle, which surprised me. And the average tax bill is on the order of 15,000. So to me, we should be looking at that because that's a similar town demographic. It's got demographically in size, it's got a similar tax base, and they seem to manage things in a better way.
they have
It's all in the school system.
they have almost 1,800 households.
More.
They have 1,800,
Spread those fixed costs over.
a little bit more.
So Stephen, here's the chart that
Yeah, so you can see it on the right side, the dark line, the slope of the line is extraordinary.
Right.
And,
last couple of years.
yeah, and hopefully with that, we could soften that slope without eating into the essential services.
So in the scenario that I set up, the increase in 2026, fiscal 26, the year we're talking about now is 4.7. And that slows down in this scenario to, 4.2 the next year and 3.7. You might think it would slow down more, but, the schools, I think, are going to be, again, on the current path. They're going to be looking for pretty big increases. They have this scenario incorporates the capital, all the items in the capital budget plan. And that includes the $2 million track and field that the school wants to do. And that's a lot of debt service. So, that's all built in and, boosts, pushes up these numbers, which is why, they don't come down more than, again, you could do a different scenario if you thought, the world's going to work out differently. This isn't really a forecast. This is really a planning document with a, what if things unfolded this way, what would we be looking at?
We have health costs and pension liabilities that we're going to be putting more into the pension fund because I think there's some longer term plan that you have to fully fund by a certain date. So there's a pull on revenue, and who knows what's going to happen to healthcare and health insurance rates.
10 single-family homes would be about $320,000+.
Yep, in revenue. Yep.
Mhm.
And additional commercial development
Well, commercial
in town center
development,
would also.
but commercial development is still property. So what's the higher value, you know?
Yeah.
It's still, commercial property is taxed the same as residential,
Right,
and still property is property.
right.
Highest and best
So
use to single family. in my
I
opinion.
wanted to just flag one other document that I shared, just as a tool that people will be able to use, and then, happy to stay and talk as long as people want, but, I just wanted to put some of this out there. I don't think we need to go for a record tonight with, the length of our meeting.
Sorry. I have
So-
a comment.
All right, let me just do a quick switch here and get this other document up to just flag so that people will know what it is and can find it. Where is that? Here it is. Okay, so this is a document that fix that. There we go. Okay, so Deb Seifring will update this for us once all the budgets come in at the end of December. And this is the document that is referred to as the budget model. And this is something that, really Deb is the owner of the long-term budget thing. That's my spreadsheet that I just spun up. This is really, Deb's thing. And this, I mentioned this because, so this is last year's, so, it doesn't have the info for this year, but just in terms of what here, this is a really useful document. I'm now on the summary page and, which has historical data on budgets. We'll have the FY26 budget requests, all the general categories. And then there are tabs here that provide a lot of detail. So here's a tab that will have full detail, every line item in the budget, so you can track that. There's a tab that does levy limit calculations. There's a tab that does some debt service stuff. So in terms of really digging, for anyone who really wants to dig into details of this year's budget, this document will appear in January. I sent last year's around for anyone who wants to go through it. A lot of what I learned about how the budget fits together, I learned by picking through the cells of this spreadsheet to understand. So how does this levy limit thing work? And what's Prop 2.5 about? And where's the tax rate come from? So it can be, in addition to just a resource, if you want to know a number for something, can also, I think, be a helpful learning tool for anyone who wants to go to that level of detail on understanding how all the budget pieces fit together. So January, we'll get the one for fiscal 26. I just sent this one around from last year for anyone who wants to get a quick look. All right, so that is all my stuff. As I said again, I don't think we need to set any records. But Doug, you had a
I
comment.
don't want to extend the meeting any longer. I want to leave people with a thought. So 58% of our budget is the school. And in past town meetings, it was always, we got to spend on the schools, we got to spend on the schools. That's why people move to town. I attended the November 12th Sherborn school committee meeting. And I will just say publicly, I was horrified at their unwillingness to take input from the public. Apparently that has changed over the last few years. They're hiding under some statewide rules of order that doesn't let the public participate in meetings. Setting that aside, I was underwhelmed by the assistant superintendent's presentation on MCAS scores. We're above average. Who cares? I mean, are we better than Brockton? Are we better than Wellesley? So I looked into it. Our school in this town is now 247th in the state. Used to be one of the top schools in the state.
This is Pine Hill.
Pine Hill,
This is rating by MCAS scores.
yeah.
Yeah.
247. It's fallen like a rock. I mean, does anyone think that in 6 years, the same kids aren't gonna make our number 8 high school, the 247th high school? I don't, like,
What happened?
what the hell's going on in our school system? This is where we're spending all our money. And so my question for everybody, and we're not gonna have this discussion tonight, is who in town is in charge of like grading the schools and figuring out how our money's getting spent and whether we're getting value for our money?
Yeah, so here's the challenge.
That number makes me want to move out of town.
Here's the challenge. The folks who have direct authority over both the programmatic and curriculum things at school are the school committees.
We're no
The
longer
diff-
accountable, apparently.
The diffuse authority is that the towns pay the bills, but the school committees make the decisions. And then, ultimately town meeting decides whether or not to approve the school budget. But it is, again, this very diffuse authority. It's very different than, say, a city where, the mayor, appoints a school, appoints a school board who, then do the schools, and the mayor is sort of, accountable. It's
Who
really
hires,
different
for
here.
example, the principal of our school?
School committee,
No.
And that's
This
elected.
gets back.
it is
this gets
elected,
back-
it is elected.
This
There,
gets
it is,
back to
the,
how the town is run, because this is BS.
the Pine Hill School Committee,
247.
the Pine Hill School Committee and the Regional School Committee,
They're
elected by the
positions.
citizens of Sherborn and for Pine Hill
It's a
and,
disaster.
both.
And the chickens are gonna come home to roost when our high school was 247 and no one wants to move here.
Yeah, and, the Regional School Committee and the Pine Hill School Committee are the ones who are, driving that train.
And
Doug, would you mind sharing where you got the data from? I'm just
US
curious.
News World Reports.
Yeah, they just published.
It's
Yeah, I saw
published
that.
Is
For,
the 240,
specifically for Pine Hill.
Pine Hill, and Chickering is like 73rd,
is,
so they're falling too, but at
is,
least they're 73rd.
is-
We're 247.
is the rating, just specifically MCAS scores, or is it just,
I don't
it's-
pretend to know.
it's the US News World Report rating, and they
Is
probably
that
have
247 in the state?
In the
Or
state of
So-
1,500.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
But I mean, the assistant
So they-
superintendent, God bless him, made this presentation about how we're all above average, way
Define
below
average.
So-
Who cares if we're
So-
above average?
so-
I want to be in the top percentage.
Yeah, so my understanding is the US News and World Report, it's more than just to clarify, it's gonna be MCAS scores plus probably 9 other criteria.
But didn't
that-
we just do away
that
with
they're
MCAS?
using.
It's
As a-
something that parents.
Did away
wanna move
with
the
it
town, look
as
at.
a graduation
Whatever it
requirement
is.
for the
Mhm.
state.
Oh, so it's still
Number
gonna
eight.
happen?
It's still gonna happen, but it's not a graduation requirement.
Oh, I
We
see.
were in the top 3, now we're 8, so the high school's falling. And I can only imagine if the elementary school is 247, where the high school's gonna be in 6 years. So
All right,
anyway, food for thought. It's,
All right. So
It's a problem.
before we wrap up, just not the time to, right? Anything anybody else wants to talk about? Doug kind of highlighted some concerns and issues about schools. Anything anybody else wanted to touch on before we wrap up?
I would make a motion to adjourn.
Perfect.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.